Starting as printer and publisher of newspaper and magazines in 1915, the Cape Town-based Naspers media conglomerate transformed into the 8th largest media company in the world. They were early-stage investors in startups, which have later turned into billion-dollar global giants during the past decade, including China's Tencent or Russia's Mail.ru. It's a pleasure for us to welcome on stage Senior VP Product and of Mobile Strategy at Naspers eCommerce, CLANCY.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today in this fantastic city. I am here today to talk a little bit about Naspers, first of all, because you would be forgiven if you've never heard of us, because it's not really a brand that consumers would know. So I'll tell you a little bit about the company, and then also talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing in the various markets that we operate in across the world. So I am CLANCY. I run mobile and product strategy for Naspers. And I recently actually just joined the company, only about 2 months ago. And I've spent the last 20 years in Silicon Valley and San Francisco in a number of different consumer internet companies, Yahoo, InView, and most recently Trulia. And it was quite funny when I told my friends and colleagues there in San Francisco that I was going to Naspers. And you know, there was either the puzzled look of what is Naspers, or the, oh yeah, Napster. I used to love those guys. I used to get all my music from Napster. And no, it's actually not Napster, it's Naspers. And the origins of that, just to talk a little bit about who we are, Naspers is actually a 100-year-old company, almost. We turn 100 next year. The company started in newspapers and magazines in the South African city of Cape Town in 1915. And the entire history of the company has really been about how are you adapting and changing to different mediums and different technologies as the world around them changed. So initially with newspapers and magazines, then we had a very significant pay TV business that we launched in Africa that was now the largest pay TV platform in Africa. And starting then about 15 or so years ago, the company started to really look at investing in internet companies across the world. And I'll tell you a little bit about the approach there, but I think the biggest shift now that we're dealing with in this transformation is how does mobile then change the types of businesses that we're dealing with right now. And to give you a sense of our overall philosophy and how we look at the market, we are primarily focused on, within the internet part of the company, we're primarily focused on e-commerce as a main theme. And then within that, there are some different segments that we focus on specifically. So we have a very, very strong presence in classifieds worldwide. So OLX, probably one of the biggest classifieds brands worldwide. We have a very significant operation in e-tail and e-commerce. Talk to you a little bit about some of those. Marketplaces like Allegro, the very dominant internet player in Poland, and some other companies there. And then our own payments group, PayU, that has customers across the world in a number of different markets, and a number of other businesses in online comparison shopping and various online services. We operate in about 130 different countries right now. And in essence, here in Turkey, we are definitely a part of the fabric of everyday life here with very, very well-known brands here in Turkey, Marcafoni in fashion, e-commerce, and Zizigo, the leading online shoes and clothing company. We have online comparison shopping in Bilio, and PayU, our online payments business, has a significant presence here in Turkey as well. So Turkey is clearly a market that we see as an opportunity, and we're going to be continuing to play here as the years go on. To give you a sense of Naspers, we're probably the largest company you've never heard of, in that it isn't a household name, the brand itself. It's not a brand that we're out there promoting to consumers. But if you looked at the overall aggregate of all of our our visits from consumers to the various properties that we have in these 130 countries, we essentially stack up very close to the leaders in e-commerce worldwide. And if you see here, the key point I think to keep in mind is similar visits numbers to Amazon and eBay, but growing much faster. And I think that is indicative of the philosophy that we have as how we look at the business. And if you look at where we are playing, Naspers almost exclusively focuses on businesses that are in what we call growth markets. So we are not focused too much on developed markets in US and Europe, but rather what were once called, I think, emerging markets in other parts of the world. Although it's kind of silly to say emerging markets these days when you have Turkey with 80 million consumers or any number of other large markets that are now seeing very impressive smartphone penetration rates and very fast movement of users on the internet and into mobile commerce as well. So there's a couple themes that we're seeing across our portfolio. Obviously, first and foremost is mobile. We're also seeing that the markets that we compete in are really not just growth markets because of fundamentals of the numbers of users or the number of people that are on the internet, but also how quickly mobile is transforming those markets to be even more interesting and exciting opportunities for investment. E-tail and classifieds, sort of e-commerce in general, of how it's really reshaping what commerce means in a lot of these markets. And that as mobile grows and grows and grows, you're seeing consumers frequently with even higher expectations for what a good experience is. And that's something I'll talk about here a little bit more. If you look at the markets that we focus on, primarily we are in the major growth markets. You can see here, for example, India and China. This is just pure number of internet users. The growth that you're seeing in some of these growth markets is absolutely driven by the expansion of mobile to those populations. So we have a very interesting diversity in our set of countries where the certain markets have 80, 90% mobile penetration precisely because they didn't even deal with desktop or anything that the more developed world was doing in that previous sort of pre-mobile phase. And so this is a key point for us. We're focused on the areas where we see growth over the long term in the next few years. Similarly, we see that e-commerce in those markets is absolutely growing at a much faster rate than developed markets. Single-digit numbers there in the growth in internet buyers in developed countries versus really outstanding growth rates in the growth in e-commerce buyers in other markets. And it's interesting to see here Turkey only surpassed by India in this frame. And so for those of you who might be wondering why is Naspers here at one of the premier internet conferences in Turkey, well, that's your reason, that's your answer right there. We're very focused on the long-term opportunity here. We're also seeing that as e-commerce is starting to take hold in these markets, the consumer experience is radically changing, right? And this is an example from the US. Target and Walmart, some of the biggest offline players in the US. But when you compare the overall SKUs that they actually have available to consumers, the selection that is available to consumers, it's just mind-blowing when you look at how that compares to the offline players. And this is a phenomenon that we will continue to see in every market around the world as you see this transformation happening of global e-commerce starting to really take off. The other phenomenon that we're seeing over and over and over again is as consumers are moving to mobile, as consumers are becoming smartphone users, their expectations of what a good user experience is will continue to increase. Who remembers the first time that they ever Shazammed a song? I think this was probably for, there you go, somebody who's listening. Awesome. For most people, that was really one of those first magic moments where they're holding this device in their hand, there's a problem okay, what is that song again? And with a tap of a button, identify music in a little second, there was delivered value there right away. And you're like, whoa, that is delight, right? And so when you see things like that have nothing to do with any of the things that I'm talking about here as far as Naspers investments, but those things outside of your own business, every day are changing the way consumers are thinking about how they want to interact with your products. And that is one of the things that I think will not go away. And you're seeing that more and more and more as new innovations are happening. People just do not have the patience for bad user experience or slow websites or slow mobile devices or you name it, right? That's just not going to go away. So to think a little bit about, okay, Naspers, you've done a lot of things in all these different markets. Are there new things happening? Are there certain trends out there that you think could further shape this e-commerce environment? As a listed company, I can't talk about, hey, we're going to be investing in X, Y, and Z. We can't really comment on the specific things that we're focused on, but I'd like to comment a little bit on some of the trends that are out there and seeing if, for all of you, how you're thinking about and looking at some of those things. Drones is one that's obviously on the list of a lot of people right now as something that could radically change the e-commerce experience, right? Amazon is doing tests in India around using drones to deliver items to far-flung markets. Clearly, there's potential there. I think it'll probably take some time. This is quite a funny anecdote. In Yellowstone National Park in the United States, a Dutch tourist crashed his drone into one of the geysers there. And I think it's indicative that along the way, there's going to be some bumps in that road from new innovation to something that is touching millions of people's lives every day. And it would really be bad if your HD television ended up in the geyser, right? And this is an area where there's nothing going on. There's no other air traffic there. It's hard enough to get around in Istanbul in a car, let alone with a bunch of drones around the air. So I think that's one where I think we're saying some potential there, but that's going to be a little ways off. I think ultimately consumers are going to figure out what it is that is valuable. And as you've seen with many different consumer products, there's always a initial hype around a certain possibility, a certain opportunity. A lot of entrants come into that market, and eventually there are some winners. And I think very indicative of that right now is just the wearables space in general. I think the hype for many people in the last couple years around wearables has been really deafening. It's not something that I think has really played out yet fully as far as what is the unique consumer value that these devices are offering. I don't think they've really found what the killer app is there yet. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how Apple's Watch goes. And there's literally, if you look at the marketing materials around that and how they've talked about it, it is the Swiss Army knife of consumer electronics devices, right? It basically will do almost anything that you want it to do. And typically when you have something like that, it's often hard to see where the consumers will take that. So I think if wearables will have an impact on e-commerce, that is something still to be seen, and I think it'll take a while before some of that hype shakes out. I do think that there's going to be a lot of activity around how do you take friction out of that e-commerce process. So right now, whether it's online or mobile, there is still an awful lot of pain and suffering in completing a transaction on devices. Even though e-commerce as an activity has been around for 2 decades here almost, there is still an awful lot of pain for most users in completing these transactions. And I think we're going to see more and more focus on technologies and innovations that take out that friction. And 2 examples I think are still in early days, but I think will have an awesome impact from just the pure user experience perspective is Touch ID, as far as very easily essentially checking out based on your thumbprint with your iOS device. And similarly, what Card.io is doing, and if you've seen what, say, Uber has done as far as integrating that into their flow, as far as just snapping the credit card quickly, no more input of credit card details, it's yet another thing that gets rid of some piece of broken glass in the way between the consumer and the product that they want to buy. So I think more and more and more there'll be plenty of activity in this area of how do you really start to take advantage of the benefits that this mobile device has, and how does it make e-commerce and online shopping easier for everyone. So just to leave everyone with a few thoughts on, if you are an investor looking at companies, or if you are an entrepreneur or startup who is figuring out your product market fit and what you're doing as far as your initial product launches and what problems you're solving for users, I think a few things to keep in mind that I've seen both in our Naspers companies but also just in other past experience. Absolutely, when you're thinking about mobile, your goal has to be that this device is going to do it way better than any other device that person's had in the past. And if you look at the great brands right now that are doing well on mobile, and you just read through App Store feedback, it is very clear that the consumers that are loving those apps are loving them because they just give them a much better experience than they had on desktop or web or anything else that they were using before. Similarly, I think the realities of the mobile user acquisition environment is that, I think it's like 90% of apps are either installed and never opened, or installed and opened once. And so clearly, if you're not able to engage that customer right away in the first few minutes of usage, you can pretty much say goodbye to that customer. And so as you're thinking about your products, that is an absolutely critical piece to make sure you get right in mobile. And similarly, especially with e-commerce, we're seeing it's very important to be thinking of a consumer's usage across devices. Study after study after study has shown that users are not simply sitting down with their device and completing it in a single sitting, but they might be looking at doing some browsing, shopping, sort of on the phone at the bus stop in the morning. They then might be checking some stuff at work on a desktop, and then later at home on their tablet, on their couch, they might be completing that transaction. So if your product is not able to handle that end-to-end consumer e-commerce transaction across devices, with that person being able to pick up where they left off and have a cart that works across all different platforms, you're probably going to have a lot of trouble converting those users. And finally, mobile has completely changed the game as far as how you are able to get users into your products. And I think anybody that has dealt with user acquisition for mobile is fully aware that the things that you did before in a web environment to get users, some of them still apply. You can still, if you have a good SEO strategy, you can still get a ton of users through SEO to your mobile site and mobile apps with download initials, but it's going to be pretty hard to get users in some of the old ways that you were doing it. So with that, I will leave you. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to chat with anybody afterwards for anything. Thank you.